I'm standing in the marble lobby of the Grandview Country Club, watching my sister Vanessa glide past me in her custom Vera Wang gown, when she leans in close enough for only me to hear. "You'll never afford a wedding like mine, Claire," she whispers with that perfect smile plastered across her face. "Maybe you should consider a backyard barbecue instead. Very on brand for you." The sting of her words burns hotter than the champagne I've been nursing for the past hour. What Vanessa doesn't know, what nobody in my family knows yet, is that in exactly 3 months, a helicopter will land at my wedding venue, and everything she thinks she understands about me will shatter like the crystal flute I'm currently gripping too tightly. My name is Claire Donovan, and I'm 34 years old, standing in the shadow of my younger sister's extravagant wedding celebration. For as long as I can remember, I've been the practical one, the sensible daughter who chose teaching over more lucrative careers, who drove a reliable Honda instead of leasing luxury vehicles, who saved money instead of spending it on designer handbags and exotic vacations. Vanessa, 3 years my junior, has always been the golden child, the one who married Preston Whitfield, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, the one who lives in a penthouse overlooking the harbor, the one our mother Catherine brags about to anyone who will listen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in suburban Portland, our childhood home was a constant exhibition of Vanessa's achievements. Dance recital trophies lined the mantel while my academic awards were relegated to a drawer in my father's study. When Vanessa was accepted to a prestigious design school in New York, our parents threw a graduation party with a catered dinner and a guest list of over 100 people. When I earned my master's degree in education with honors, we had cake at home with immediate family. The pattern was so consistent, so normalized, that I barely questioned it anymore. It was just the way things were in the Donovan household. My father, Robert, had always been more subtle in his favoritism, but it was there nonetheless. He would listen to Vanessa's stories about her interior design clients with rapt attention, asking questions and offering advice. When I talked about my 7th grade English students and the breakthrough moments when struggling readers finally connected with literature, he would nod politely while scrolling through his phone. My mother was less subtle. Catherine Donovan had married into old Portland money and had very specific ideas about what constituted success and respectability. A daughter who married well and lived in the right neighborhood ranked far higher than a daughter who taught at an underfunded public school in a working-class district. The contrast became even more pronounced when I got engaged to Daniel Morrison 2 years ago. Daniel was a general contractor who had built his own successful construction company from the ground up. He was kind, hardworking, and genuinely good, everything I had ever wanted in a partner. But to my mother, he was simply not Preston Whitfield. He didn't come from money. His family didn't belong to the right clubs. His last name didn't open doors or command respect in the social circles my mother valued. When Vanessa announced her engagement to Preston 18 months ago, my mother had actually cried tears of joy. The engagement ring alone cost more than my annual salary. The engagement party at Preston's family estate featured a jazz quartet and champagne that cost $300 per bottle. When Daniel proposed to me on a quiet beach at sunset with his grandmother's vintage ring, my mother's response was a tight smile and a comment about how quaint it all was. Planning for Vanessa's wedding had consumed the past year of our family's life. My mother had thrown herself into the preparations with the intensity of a military campaign. No detail was too small, no expense too great. The venue was the Grandview Country Club, the most exclusive location in the city, with a waiting list that typically stretched years into the future. Somehow, Preston's family connections had secured it. The guest list topped 400 people. The flowers alone cost more than most people's entire wedding budgets. Vanessa had insisted on flying in a celebrity wedding planner from Los Angeles who charged $20,000 just for the consultation. Throughout the planning process, Vanessa never missed an opportunity to remind me of the disparity between our situations. During a family dinner 3 months before her wedding, she had turned to me with that same saccharine smile and asked, "Have you and Daniel set a date yet? I mean, I know you're probably waiting until you can save up enough, but you should really book something soon. All the good affordable venues get taken years in advance." My mother had laughed, actually laughed, and added, "Well, Claire has always been so practical." I'm sure she'll find something nice within their budget. What neither of them knew was that I had already booked my venue. What they didn't understand was that my life was not what they assumed it to be. What they couldn't possibly imagine was that the practical, sensible Claire they thought they knew had been hiding the truth for years. The truth was that Daniel's construction company wasn't just successful, it was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. 3 years ago, he had secured a contract to build a series of eco-friendly housing developments, and the project had exploded. His innovative designs and commitment to sustainability had caught the attention of major developers and environmental organizations. The company had expanded from a small operation with 5 employees to a regional powerhouse with over 100 staff members and contracts worth millions. The truth was that I wasn't just a teacher anymore. 2 years ago, I had written a young adult novel during summer vacation, more as a creative outlet than any serious professional ambition. On a whim, I had submitted it to a literary agent who specialized in educational fiction. 6 months later, I had a 3-book deal with a major publisher. My first novel had been released last year and had quietly become a bestseller, resonating with teenagers and educators alike. The advance and royalties had been substantial, more money than I had ever imagined making from something I loved doing. The truth was that Daniel and I had been living well below our means, saving and investing wisely, not because we couldn't afford more but because we chose not to display our wealth. We had kept our success private, partly because we valued our privacy and partly because I had learned from years of living in Vanessa's shadow that sometimes the best revenge was simply living well without needing an audience. But keeping secrets in a family like mine came with its own costs. I had sat through countless dinners where my mother lamented my modest lifestyle, where Vanessa made comments about my budget-friendly choices, where extended family members expressed concern about whether I was getting by on a teacher's salary. I had bitten my tongue through bridal showers where Vanessa's friends had asked me if I was nervous about affording my own wedding, through family gatherings where Preston's relatives had politely but obviously looked down on Daniel's background. The decision to reveal the truth had not come easily. Daniel and I had discussed it extensively, weighing the satisfaction of shocking my family against our preference for privacy. What finally tipped the scales was not pride or revenge, but simple exhaustion. I was tired of pretending to be less than I was. I was tired of allowing my family to underestimate me and Daniel. I was tired of the constant subtle digs and the assumption that Vanessa's life was somehow more valuable or successful than mine. So we had planned. Carefully, methodically, with the same attention to detail that Daniel brought to his construction projects and I brought to my teaching. We had booked a venue that would make the Grandview Country Club look pedestrian by comparison. We had hired the kind of vendors that required deposits larger than most people's car payments. And we had kept every single detail absolutely secret from my family. Now, standing at Vanessa's reception, watching her hold court in her designer gown, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, in knowing what was coming. There was also sadness, a recognition that my relationship with my family had been broken for a long time, possibly beyond repair. And underneath it all was a steely determination that had been building for years. I was done being dismissed. I was done being the practical sister, the sensible one, the one who didn't quite measure up. Vanessa floated past me again, her hand possessively on Preston's arm, and this time she didn't even acknowledge my presence. My mother was nearby, describing the wedding to a group of relatives with such pride you would think she had personally orchestrated every detail. My father stood at the bar, deep in conversation with Preston's father about golf and investments, the kind of conversation he had never thought to have with Daniel. I caught Daniel's eye across the room. He was standing near the windows, looking impossibly handsome in his tuxedo, talking easily with one of Preston's cousins. When our eyes met, he gave me a small, knowing smile. We had 3 more months to wait. 3 more months of keeping our secrets. 3 more months until my family would finally see me as I truly was. The evening progressed with all the orchestrated elegance that $2 million could buy. The dinner was exquisite, featuring courses I couldn't even pronounce. The band was a well-known group that typically performed at celebrity events. The cake was a 7-tier masterpiece that probably cost more than my first car. Through it all, Vanessa glowed with the satisfaction of someone who believed herself to be the center of the universe. During the father-daughter dance, I watched my father beam at Vanessa with unmistakable pride. When had he last looked at me that way? I couldn't remember. The realization didn't hurt as much as it once would have. I had spent too many years seeking approval that was never going to come, at least not in the form I wanted it. My Aunt Patricia found me during a break between dances. She was my father's sister, one of the few family members who had always treated me and Vanessa equally. "Beautiful wedding," she said, sipping her champagne. "Though between you and me, it's all a bit much, don't you think?" I smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. "It's very Vanessa." "That it is." Patricia studied me with shrewd eyes. "I heard you and Daniel set your date. June, right? At some venue out in wine country?" "That's right. The Belcrest Estate." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. She was one of the few people in my family who actually paid attention to such things. The Belcrest Estate was not just any venue, it was arguably the most exclusive private estate in the Pacific Northwest. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A historic property that had been in the same family for 5 generations. It wasn't even technically available for events. The family only opened it for very special occasions, and only for people they deemed worthy of their property's legacy. "How on earth did you manage to book the Belcrest?" Patricia asked, keeping her voice low. "Daniel built the renovation on their west wing 2 years ago," I explained. "They were so impressed with his work that they've become friends. When we got engaged, they offered the estate for our wedding as a gift." Patricia let out a low whistle. "Does Catherine know?" "Not yet. We've kept the details fairly quiet." "Oh, this is going to be interesting." There was a gleam of anticipation in my aunt's eyes. "Your mother has been trying to get invited to events at the Belcrest for 20 years. The Bellwoods are notoriously selective about their social connections." I hadn't thought about it from that angle, but Patricia was right. The Bellwood family represented old money in its truest form, the kind of established, understated wealth that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. They were exactly the kind of family my mother aspired to impress, and they were exactly the kind of family that found people like my mother's social climbing distasteful. The evening finally wound down around midnight. Vanessa and Preston made their grand exit through a shower of sparklers, climbing into a vintage Rolls-Royce that would take them to their honeymoon suite at the city's most expensive hotel before they flew to the Maldives in the morning. As I watched them drive away, my mother appeared at my side. "Wasn't it just perfect?" she sighed, still clutching her champagne glass. "Everything a wedding should be. I could have let it go. I should have let it go." But months of accumulated hurt and dismissal finally bubbled over. It was certainly expensive. My mother looked at me sharply. "A wedding is an investment in a couple's future, Claire. It sets the tone for their life together. When you and Daniel get married, I hope you'll remember that it's worth stretching your budget for something memorable." "Oh, don't worry," I said, keeping my voice light. "Our wedding will definitely be memorable." Something in my tone made her eyes narrow, but before she could question me further, my father called her over to say goodbye to Preston's parents. I took the opportunity to find Daniel, and together we slipped out to the parking lot. In the car, Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Just ready to get out of here." "Only 3 more months," he reminded me. "And then they'll see." "And then they'll see," I repeated, allowing myself a small smile. As we drove home through the quiet streets, I reflected on how much had changed in the past 2 years. The shy, overlooked daughter who had always accepted her place in the family hierarchy was gone. In her place was a woman who had built her own success, found her own voice, and was finally ready to stop hiding her light under a bushel just to make other people comfortable. The next few months passed in a blur of wedding preparations that I carefully kept from my family's prying eyes. My mother called regularly, offering unsolicited advice about budget-friendly options and suggesting I should consider pushing back the wedding date if Daniel and I needed more time to save money. I accepted her suggestions with polite non-committal responses, sharing nothing about the reality of our plans. Vanessa returned from her honeymoon tanned and glowing, immediately diving into decorating her new penthouse with the same excessive enthusiasm she brought to everything. She invited me to lunch twice, and both times managed to work in comments about my upcoming, simple, wedding. "There's something really authentic about a small, intimate celebration," she said during our second lunch, picking at her overpriced salad. "Not everyone needs the big production like Preston and I had. You and Daniel are more the low-key type anyway." I smiled and said nothing, taking a bite of my own lunch and letting her assumptions remain unchallenged. The truth was becoming its own delicious secret, a gift I was giving to my future self. Daniel and I finalized details with the vendors we had carefully selected. The florist was an artist who typically only worked with the most exclusive clients, known for creating installations that looked like natural growing gardens rather than traditional arrangements. The caterer was a James Beard Award winner who had flown in from San Francisco specifically because he was intrigued by our vision. The photographer was someone whose work had been featured in Vogue and Martha Stewart weddings, with a waiting list that typically stretched 2 years into the future. And then there was the helicopter. That detail had come about almost accidentally. Daniel's business partner, Marcus, was an aviation enthusiast who owned a vintage helicopter that he had lovingly restored. When he heard we were getting married at the Belcrest estate, he had offered it for our grand entrance. "The property has that massive lawn on the south side," he had explained. "Perfect landing spot. Imagine arriving at your own wedding from the air. It would be unforgettable." Daniel had looked at me, eyebrows raised in question. I had thought about Vanessa's comment at her wedding, about never being able to afford something like hers. I had thought about my mother's constant suggestions to keep things practical and within budget. I had thought about a lifetime of being underestimated and overlooked. "Let's do it," I had said. Now, with just 2 weeks until the wedding, the final pieces were falling into place. The invitations had been sent months ago, elegant cream cardstock with gold engraving, beautiful but not ostentatious. Most of our guests were friends, colleagues, and Daniel's family, people who knew us well and would celebrate our happiness without judgment. We had invited my parents, Vanessa and Preston, and a select few of my extended family, including Aunt Patricia. My mother had called when she received the invitation, her voice tight with concern. "Claire, darling, the Belcrest estate. Are you sure about this? I've heard they're extremely expensive to book. I hope you and Daniel haven't overextended yourselves. There's no shame in choosing something more affordable." "We're fine, Mom," I had assured her. "Everything is taken care of. Well, if you need help, your father and I could possibly contribute something, though nothing like what we gave Vanessa and Preston, of course. Their wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime expense. We don't need any help. But thank you for offering." There had been a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in my mother's head as she tried to figure out what she was missing. But she couldn't quite bring herself to ask directly, and I wasn't volunteering information. Vanessa's reaction to the invitation had been different. She had called me immediately, her voice sharp with something that sounded almost like panic. "The Belcrest estate? Claire, are you serious? How did you even get them to accept a booking? They never rent out that property." "We have connections," I had said simply. "What kind of connections?" "Through Daniel's construction work." There was a note of disdain in her voice, as if the idea of social connections through actual work was somehow inferior. "Something like that. Well, I hope you know what you're doing. Places like that have certain expectations. The guests, the catering, the whole atmosphere has to match the venue's prestige. If you're not careful, it could come across as very try-hard." I had bitten back a laugh at that comment coming from someone who had hired a celebrity wedding planner and flown in roses from Ecuador for her reception. "I think we'll manage." The days counting down to the wedding felt simultaneously endless and far too short. I was excited, nervous, and underneath it all, there was a current of something else, a sense of vindication, perhaps, or maybe just the quiet satisfaction of finally being able to show my family who I really was. The week before the wedding, Daniel and I drove out to the Belcrest estate for our final walkthrough. The property was even more beautiful than I remembered, sprawling across 200 acres of rolling hills, pristine gardens, and old-growth forest. The main house was a magnificent stone structure built in the 1880s, all soaring ceilings and mullioned windows, with a grand ballroom that could easily accommodate our guest list of 200. Eleanor Bellwood, the current matriarch of the family, greeted us warmly. She was in her 70s, elegant and sharp-eyed, with the kind of grace that came from generations of good breeding tempered by genuine kindness. "Everything is ready," she assured us, walking us through the spaces we would use. "The weather forecast looks perfect. Clear skies, mild temperatures. Ideal for a June wedding." "Thank you again for letting us use your home," I said, not for the first time. "It means more than you know." Eleanor smiled. When Daniel first came to work on our renovation, I knew immediately he was someone special. The care he took with our family's history, the respect he showed for the original architecture while making necessary updates, it spoke to his character. And then I met you and saw how you two are together. This house has seen many weddings over the years, but I have a feeling yours will be one we'll remember. As we walked the grounds, finalizing the ceremony location and reception flow, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This wedding wasn't about showing up my sister or proving something to my parents. It was about celebrating a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. The fact that it would also reveal truths my family had been blind to for years was simply a bonus. The night before the wedding, I stayed at a boutique hotel near the estate with my bridesmaids, a small group of close friends who had supported me through years of family drama without judgment. My maid of honor, Jessica, had been my roommate in college and had witnessed firsthand the family dynamics that had shaped me. "Are you nervous?" she asked as we sat on the hotel room balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Surprisingly, no," I admitted. "I'm excited. Ready. Even for the moment when your mom and sister realize what's happening." "Especially for that moment," I said, and we both laughed. Jessica raised her wine glass in a toast. "To Claire Donovan, who spent years being underestimated and is about to blow everyone's minds." I clinked my glass against hers. "To new beginnings." As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep from a mixture of anticipation and excitement, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The years of feeling less than, the constant comparisons, the subtle and not so subtle put-downs from my own family. I thought about the moment at Vanessa's wedding when she had whispered that cruel comment about me never affording a wedding like hers. Tomorrow, she would eat those words. Tomorrow, my whole family would see me clearly for the first time. Tomorrow, the helicopter would land, and everything would change. I smiled in the darkness and finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of clear skies and new beginnings. The morning of my wedding dawned exactly as Eleanor Bellwood had predicted. Crystal clear skies with the kind of perfect June weather that seemed almost orchestrated. I woke early, before my bridesmaids, and stood on the hotel balcony watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere across the city, my family was waking up too, probably still assuming they knew exactly what kind of day this would be. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Good morning, soon-to-be Mrs. Morrison. Ready to show them what we're made of?" I smiled and typed back. "More than ready. See you at the altar." The bridal suite at the Belcrest estate was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Tall windows overlooked the formal gardens where the ceremony would take place. The room itself was decorated in soft creams and golds, with antique furniture that had been in the Bellwood family for generations. When my bridesmaids and I arrived at 9 in the morning, there was already a spread of fresh pastries, fruit, and champagne waiting for us. "This is insane," Jessica breathed, taking in the space. "Claire, this is like something out of a magazine." My other bridesmaids, Samantha, my former college roommate, Lauren, a fellow teacher who had become one of my closest friends, and Daniel's sister Rachel, who had welcomed me into their family with open arms, all echoed the sentiment. None of them had been to the Belcrest estate before, and I watched their faces as they explored the suite, touching the silk curtains and admiring the view. The hair and makeup team arrived at 9:30, a group of professionals who worked with the precision of artists. As they transformed each of us, I felt a strange calm settling over me. There was no anxiety about the ceremony itself, no cold feet about marrying Daniel. The only butterflies in my stomach were related to the moment when my family would arrive and begin to understand that their assumptions about my life had been entirely wrong. My wedding dress hung on a padded hanger near the window, catching the morning light. It was a custom creation by a designer whose work I had admired for years, made from layers of silk organza with delicate beading that created a subtle shimmer. The bodice was fitted, the skirt flowing and romantic without being overly dramatic. It had cost more than my car, but unlike my family's displays of wealth, it felt right, a choice made because I loved it, not because I needed to prove anything. Around 11, there was a knock on the suite door. Eleanor Bellwood entered, looking elegant in a pale blue dress. "How is everyone doing up here?" she asked warmly. "We're wonderful," I said, gesturing to the spread of food and the organized chaos of beauty preparations. "Thank you again for everything." "My pleasure, dear. I wanted to let you know that guests are beginning to arrive. The ceremony chairs are set up in the garden, and everything looks absolutely beautiful." She paused, a slight smile playing at her lips. "I just spoke with a woman who introduced herself as your mother. She seemed quite surprised by the property." I could only imagine my mother's face when she had driven through the estate gates and seen the sprawling grounds, the historic mansion, the obvious wealth and prestige of the location. I'm sure she was. Eleanor's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Well, I assured her that you and Daniel are very special friends of our family. I thought that might be helpful context for her." After Eleanor left, Jessica came to stand beside me at the window. Below, we could see the garden being transformed into a ceremony space. White chairs arranged in neat rows, an arbor covered in climbing roses and delicate greenery, staff members making final adjustments to the setup. In the distance, we could see the south lawn where the helicopter would land in a few hours. "Your family is going to lose their minds," Jessica observed. "I know. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the question seriously. Was I ready for the confrontation, the questions, the possible anger or resentment? Was I ready to stop being the overlooked daughter and step into the truth of who I had become? "Yes," I said finally. "I'm ready." By noon, I was dressed and ready. The transformation was complete, hair swept into an elegant updo with a few loose curls framing my face, makeup that enhanced my features without looking overdone, and the dress that made me feel like the best version of myself. My bridesmaids looked beautiful in their sage green gowns, a color that complemented the garden setting perfectly. Rachel, Daniel's sister, came over and gave me a tight hug. "My brother is the luckiest man alive," she said, tears already forming in her eyes. "And I'm so happy to officially have you as my sister." The contrast with my own sister was not lost on me. Rachel had welcomed me from the moment Daniel introduced us, including me in family gatherings, genuinely interested in my life and work. Vanessa had spent years finding ways to diminish me while pretending to be supportive. The family you choose, I had learned, was often more meaningful than the family you were born into. At 12:30, there was another knock on the door. This time it was my father. He stepped into the room and stopped, his expression shifting from polite expectation to genuine surprise. "Claire," he said softly. "You look absolutely beautiful." "Thank you, Dad." He approached slowly, taking in the suite, the view, the obvious luxury of the surroundings. "This place is remarkable." "I had no idea." "I mean, your mother mentioned the Belcrest estate, but I didn't realize." He trailed off, seeming at a loss for words. "It's something, isn't it?" I said, keeping my tone light. "How did you and Daniel manage to book this?" The Bellwoods are notoriously private. They don't even host events for most of Portland's elite families. Daniel did some work for them. We became friends. They offered the estate as a wedding gift. My father's eyes widened. "A wedding gift? Claire, do you understand what that means? The Bellwoods don't give gifts like that lightly. That's an endorsement, a statement about their regard for you both." It was possibly the first time in my adult life that I had seen my father look at me with something approaching awe. The realization brought a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Why had it taken this this display of wealth and social connection, for him to see me as worthy of his admiration. We're very grateful for their generosity, I said simply. He was quiet for a moment, studying me with new eyes. Your mother is downstairs. She's quite overwhelmed by all of this. And Vanessa? He paused. Vanessa seems unsettled. I'm sure she is. Claire, I think there are things about your life that we've been unaware of. Things you haven't shared with us. You never asked, Dad. You and Mom were always so focused on Vanessa, so convinced that her life was the only one worth paying attention to. I stopped trying to share things with you because it was clear you weren't really interested. The words hung in the air between us, honest and raw. My father looked stricken. That's not. I never meant to make you feel that way. I know you didn't mean to. But intent doesn't erase impact. Before he could respond, the wedding coordinator knocked gently and announced it was time to head down to the garden. My father offered me his arm, and I took it, allowing him to escort me to the private staircase that led to the ceremony space. The garden had been transformed into something magical. Hundreds of flowers created natural-looking arrangements that seemed to have grown there organically. The chairs were filled with guests, all standing as the music began. And at the end of the aisle, standing under the rose-covered arbor, was Daniel. He looked incredible in his tailored tuxedo, his face lit up with a smile that was just for me. As my father walked me down the aisle, I was aware of the murmurs from my family's section, the whispers and surprised looks as they took in the full scope of the setting. But I kept my eyes on Daniel, on the future we were building together, and everything else faded into background noise. The ceremony itself was beautiful and personal. We had written our own vows, and when it came time to speak them, I felt the truth of every word. Daniel promised to support my dreams, to celebrate my successes, to be my partner in every sense of the word. I promised the same, knowing that unlike the relationships I had grown up witnessing in my own family, this partnership was built on equality and mutual respect. When the officiant pronounced us married and Daniel kissed me, the applause was thunderous. As we walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, I caught glimpses of my family's faces. My mother looked stunned, her carefully maintained composure cracking as she tried to process what she was seeing. Vanessa's expression was harder to read, surprise, certainly, but underneath it something that looked almost like fear. The cocktail hour took place on the terrace overlooking the formal gardens. Servers circulated with champagne and elegant hors d'oeuvres that rivaled anything served at Vanessa's wedding. The quartet we had hired played classical pieces with contemporary arrangements, creating an atmosphere of sophisticated celebration. I was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, but through the crowd, I could see my mother making her way toward me with determination. She reached me just as I finished accepting congratulations from Daniel's business partner Marcus. Claire, we need to talk, she said, her voice tight and controlled. Privately. I excused myself from the group and followed her to a quieter corner of the terrace. Up close, I could see the tension in her face, the way her hands gripped her champagne glass too tightly. What is going on? She demanded, her voice low but intense. This estate, this wedding, everything, where did the money come from? Has Daniel gotten himself into debt? Are you both in over your heads with some kind of elaborate financing scheme? I almost laughed at her assumptions, at her inability to conceive that Daniel and I might simply be successful in our own right. There's no debt, Mom. No financing scheme. We can afford this. That's impossible. You're a teacher. Daniel runs a small construction company. This kind of wedding costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. The venue alone, Daniel's construction company isn't small anymore, I interrupted. It hasn't been for years. He's built it into one of the most successful firms in the region. And I'm not just a teacher. I'm also a published author with a 3-book deal and a best-selling novel. My mother's face went blank with shock. What? When did this happen? The book deal was 2 years ago. The novel came out last year. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for 6 months. Why didn't you tell us? The question hung between us, loaded with years of complicated history. Why would I? You never showed interest in my life before. Every accomplishment I ever shared was met with comparisons to Vanessa or suggestions that I should be doing something different. So I stopped sharing. I built a life that made me happy, and I didn't feel the need to perform it for an audience that had already decided I wasn't worthy of their attention. That's not fair, Claire. We've always supported you. No, Mom. You've always tolerated me while celebrating Vanessa. There's a difference. Before she could respond, Vanessa appeared, Preston trailing behind her looking uncomfortable. My sister's perfectly styled hair and designer dress seemed almost like armor, but I could see the cracks in her composure. So this is what you've been hiding, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with accusation. All those lunches where you sat there in your practical clothes, driving your Honda, letting me go on about my life. You were playing some kind of game. I wasn't playing anything, I said calmly. I was living my life. You're the one who made assumptions. You deliberately let us think you were struggling. You made us feel sorry for you. I never asked for your pity, Vanessa. You offered it freely because it made you feel superior. I just stopped correcting your assumptions because I realized you needed to believe you were better than me. It was important to your sense of self. Vanessa's face flushed red. That's not true. I've always been supportive of you. Really? Because I remember you telling me at your wedding that I'd never afford a wedding like yours. I remember years of subtle digs about my budget, my practical choices, my modest lifestyle. That's not support, Vanessa. That's condescension disguised as concern. Preston shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should discuss this later, when everyone's had a chance to calm down. Stay out of this, Preston, Vanessa snapped. Then, turning back to me, you did this to embarrass me. To show me up. I did this because I fell in love with a wonderful man and wanted to celebrate our marriage in a way that felt right to us. Your embarrassment is your own issue to deal with. Girls, please, my mother interjected, looking around nervously at the other guests who were starting to notice the tension. This is Claire's wedding day. Can we table this discussion for another time? Actually, I think we should discuss it now, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Because this pattern has been going on for too long, and it needs to end. My father appeared then, having clearly been summoned by my mother's anxious glances. What's happening here? Your daughter has been lying to us for years, Vanessa said dramatically. Pretending to be poor while secretly living some kind of double life. I haven't lied about anything, I corrected. I simply didn't share information with people who had already decided they knew everything about my life. You all made assumptions based on your own biases, and I let you because I was tired of fighting for recognition I was never going to receive. That's quite an accusation, my father said quietly. Is it? When was the last time you asked about my writing, Dad? When was the last time you wanted to know about my students or the programs I've developed at school? When was the last time either of you celebrated something I accomplished without immediately comparing it to Vanessa? The silence that followed was telling. My parents exchanged glances, and I could see the dawning realization on their faces that they had no good answer to my questions. I think what your mother and I are struggling with, my father finally said, is understanding why you felt you couldn't share these successes with us. We're your parents. We want to know about your achievements. Do you, though? Because my experience has been that my achievements only mattered if they fit the narrative you wanted for me. And since I chose a different path than the one you valued, teaching instead of something more lucrative, marrying Daniel instead of someone from your social circle, my successes didn't really count. You're being unfair, my mother protested weakly. Am I? Let me ask you something, Mom. How much did you contribute to Vanessa's wedding? My mother hesitated. That's not relevant. How much? $50,000, she admitted. Your father and I wanted to help them create their perfect day. And when I got engaged, what did you offer? Another pause. We offered to contribute what we could, within reason. You offered $5,000 and suggested we consider a backyard wedding to stay within our means. 10% of what you gave Vanessa. The message was clear: my wedding, my marriage, my life were worth 1/10 the investment. We didn't think you needed the money, my father said. Daniel seemed capable of providing for you. So it wasn't about the money at all. It was about respect. About showing that you valued what Vanessa was building more than what I was building. And you know what? I didn't need your money then, and I don't need it now. But it would have been nice to feel like you cared as much about my happiness as you did about hers. Vanessa made a disgusted sound. This is so typical of you, Claire. Making everything about yourself, playing the victim, acting like you've been so wronged. Meanwhile, you've been sitting on some secret fortune, probably laughing at us behind our backs. If I wanted to laugh at you, Vanessa, I would have announced my book deal when it happened. I would have posted about my royalties on social media. I would have told everyone at your wedding that my income now exceeds yours. But I didn't do any of those things because, believe it or not, I'm not interested in competition. I just wanted to live my life without constant judgment and comparison. Daniel appeared at my elbow, his presence immediately calming. Everything okay here? We're having a family discussion, my mother said stiffly. I can see that. Daniel's hand found mine, and I squeezed it gratefully. Claire, the photographer wants to do some family portraits before the reception starts. If you're ready. I looked at my family, my mother's defensive posture, my father's confused disappointment, Vanessa's barely concealed anger. I think we're done here for now. We can continue this conversation later if necessary, but right now, I'm going to enjoy my wedding. As Daniel and I walked away, I heard Vanessa say something sharp to Preston, and my mother's urgent whispers to my father. But I didn't look back. I had spent too many years looking back, trying to win approval that was never going to come on terms I could accept. The photography session was a welcome respite. Daniel's family was warm and enthusiastic, his parents beaming with pride, his siblings joking and laughing as the photographer arranged us into various groupings. When it was time for photos with my own family, the energy shifted noticeably. Everyone smiled for the camera, but the smiles were tight and forced. Aunt Patricia, who had witnessed the confrontation from a distance, pulled me aside afterward. I've been waiting 30 years for someone to tell Catherine and Robert the truth about their parenting, she said bluntly. Good for you, sweetheart. You've grown into quite a woman. Thank you, Aunt Patricia. That means a lot. Your mother is going to need time to process this. She's built her entire identity around being Vanessa's mother, the mother of the successful daughter who married well. Having to confront that her other daughter is equally successful but achieved it without her approval or guidance, that's going to be hard for her ego. I can't worry about her ego anymore. I've spent too many years trying to manage her feelings while my own got ignored. Patricia nodded approvingly. Exactly right. You focus on your marriage, your career, your life. Let Catherine figure out how to deal with her own issues. The reception was held in the Belcrest's Grand Ballroom, a space that took my breath away even though I had seen it during the planning process. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables dressed in ivory linens with centerpieces of garden roses and greenery. The band was setting up on a small stage, and through the tall windows, you could see the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon. Guests found their assigned seats, and Daniel and I prepared for our entrance. But we weren't walking in, we were flying in. This was the moment I had been simultaneously anticipating and slightly dreading, the grand gesture that would remove any remaining doubt about our financial situation. The helicopter was scheduled to land on the south lawn at exactly 6:15, just as the reception was set to begin. Guests would be seated in the ballroom, drinks in hand, expecting a traditional entrance. Instead, they would hear the distinctive sound of rotor blades and see through the windows a vintage helicopter touching down on the perfectly manicured grass. Marcus, Daniel's business partner and the helicopter's owner, gave us a thumbs up from the pilot's seat. I gathered my dress carefully, and with Daniel's help, climbed into the passenger area. The helicopter had been beautifully restored, all polished wood and leather seats, with "Just Married" painted on the side in elegant script. As we lifted off from the private landing area behind the estate where we had been waiting, my stomach dropped with a mixture of exhilaration and nerves. Daniel wrapped his arm around me, and we watched the landscape fall away beneath us. We circled once over the estate, seeing the full scope of the property from above, the historic mansion, the formal gardens, the forest surrounding it all. Then Marcus began our descent toward the south lawn, visible through the ballroom windows. I imagined the scene inside, guests turning at the sound, rushing to the windows, my family's faces as they realized what was happening. The landing was smooth and professional. As soon as the helicopter touched down and the rotors began to slow, staff members who had been waiting rushed forward with a red carpet that they rolled out from the helicopter to the ballroom entrance. It was theatrical, certainly, but it was also genuine, a celebration of how far Daniel and I had come, both individually and together. Daniel helped me out first, and there was a surreal moment of standing on the lawn in my wedding dress, my hair whipping in the residual wind from the rotors, before the applause started. Through the ballroom windows, I could see everyone on their feet, clapping and cheering. I could also see my mother's face, pale with shock, and Vanessa standing frozen with her mouth literally hanging open. We walked the red carpet together, Daniel's hand firmly in mine, and entered the ballroom to a standing ovation. The band immediately launched into our entrance song, and the celebration began in earnest. Our first dance was magical, moving through the steps we had practiced while being fully present in the moment. When the song ended and the floor opened for others to join, I was immediately swept into dances with various guests. Daniel's father claimed me first, telling me how happy I made his son and how welcome I was in their family. Marcus cut in next, joking about his helicopter finally being used for something romantic instead of just his weekend hobby. I was dancing with one of Daniel's college friends when I saw Vanessa standing at the edge of the dance floor, alone. Preston was at the bar, and for the first time, my sister looked small and uncertain. Our eyes met, and after a moment's hesitation, I excused myself from my dance partner and approached her. "Hey," I said simply. "A helicopter," Vanessa said, her voice flat. "You arrived at your own wedding in a helicopter. Daniel's business partner owns it." He offered. Of course he did. Because apparently you and Daniel have all these wealthy friends and connections that we knew nothing about. You never asked about our friends. You never showed interest in our lives beyond making assumptions about our financial situation. Vanessa was quiet for a moment, watching the dancing. "I told you that you'd never afford a wedding like mine. I remember. I was cruel. I've been cruel to you for a long time, haven't I?" The admission caught me off guard. "Yes, you have. I don't know why I did it. Or maybe I do, and I just don't want to admit it." She looked at me finally, and I saw something in her expression I had never seen before, genuine vulnerability. "You were always smarter than me. More talented. Better at everything you tried. Mom and Dad might not have seen it, but I did. It terrified me. So you spent years trying to make me feel inferior? I spent years trying to convince myself I was better. And I convinced Mom and Dad too, because they wanted to believe it. It was easier for all of us if you were the overlooked daughter and I was the golden child. But the truth is, you were always going to surpass me. You just did it quietly, without needing an audience." I didn't know what to say. This was the most honest conversation Vanessa and I had ever had. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued. "I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I've done, and I'm ashamed." "What changed?" "Watching you today. Seeing this wedding, meeting your friends, understanding the life you've built. And realizing that you did it all without our parents' approval or support. You didn't need their validation to succeed. You just succeeded anyway. That takes a strength I don't have. You could develop that strength, Vanessa. You could stop measuring your worth by Mom and Dad standards and figure out what actually makes you happy." She smiled sadly. "Maybe. But today isn't about me. It's about you and Daniel. And for what it's worth, this is the most beautiful wedding I've ever been to. Not because of the helicopter or the estate or any of the expensive details, but because it actually feels like a celebration of two people who genuinely love each other." Before I could respond, Preston appeared, looking concerned. "Vanessa, are you okay?" I'm fine. I was just congratulating my sister on her wedding. As they walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Vanessa's admission didn't erase years of hurt, and it didn't automatically repair our relationship. But it was honest, and honesty was something we had never had before. The rest of the evening unfolded like a dream. The dinner was exquisite, the toasts were heartfelt, and the dancing went on until midnight. My parents kept their distance for most of the reception, though I noticed my father watching me several times with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't until the end of the night, as guests were beginning to leave, that my mother approached me. She looked tired, her earlier shock having given way to something more contemplative. "Claire, could we talk? Just for a moment?" We stepped out onto the terrace, now lit by subtle landscape lighting that made the gardens glow softly in the darkness. My mother wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders and looked out at the view. "I've been doing a lot of thinking tonight," she began. "About what you said earlier. About how we treated you compared to Vanessa. Mom, if you're just going to defend your choices, I'd rather not. I'm not. I'm trying to apologize." That stopped me. In my entire life, I couldn't remember my mother ever apologizing to me for anything substantial. "I've been a terrible mother to you, haven't I?" she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't mean I was abusive or neglectful in obvious ways. But I failed you in subtle, persistent ways that probably cut deeper. I made you feel less than, made you feel like you had to earn love and approval that should have been freely given." "Why?" I asked quietly. "Why did you favor Vanessa so much?" My mother was silent for a long time. "Because she needed it more," she finally said. "Or at least, that's what I told myself. Vanessa always seemed more fragile, more in need of validation and support. You were so capable, so self-sufficient. I thought you didn't need me the same way she did. Everyone needs their mother, Mom. Everyone needs to feel valued and celebrated by their family. I know that now. Watching you tonight, seeing what you've accomplished, understanding that you did it all while feeling unsupported by your own parents, it's heartbreaking. And it's my fault." I felt tears prickling at my eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see you now. And I'm so proud of who you've become, even though I played no part in it. You played a part, Mom. Just not the part you think. You taught me resilience, taught me to trust myself, taught me that I could succeed without external validation. Those aren't the lessons you meant to teach, but they're valuable nonetheless." We stood together in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party winding down behind us. It wasn't complete reconciliation, that would take time, if it was even possible. But it was a start, an acknowledgement of truth that had been avoided for too long. "Your father and I would like to take you and Daniel to dinner next week," my mother said. "To celebrate properly, and to get to know you both better. The real you, not the version we assumed we knew." "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. As my mother went back inside, I remained on the terrace, looking up at the stars beginning to emerge in the clear night sky. Daniel found me there a few minutes later, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "How are you holding up?" he asked, kissing my temple. "Better than expected, actually. Today was everything I hoped it would be." "Even the family drama?" "Even that. Because the drama came with some truth, and truth was what was needed." We stood together, watching our wedding guests departing, their headlights creating strings of light as they drove down the long estate driveway. In a few hours, we would leave for our honeymoon in Italy. But right now, in this moment, I felt completely at peace. The girl who had been overlooked and dismissed was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who had built a life of meaning and success on her own terms, who had found love with someone who saw and celebrated all of her. The helicopter landing had been dramatic, certainly, but it was just a symbol of a larger truth. I had always been capable of flying, I had just needed to stop waiting for permission to take off. 6 months after the wedding, I sat in a cozy corner booth at a downtown bistro with Vanessa, our monthly lunch having become an unexpected tradition. The dynamic between us had shifted in ways I never could have predicted. We weren't exactly close, but we were honest with each other now, and that honesty had created a different kind of relationship, one built on reality rather than pretense. Preston and I are in couples therapy, Vanessa said, stirring her coffee absently. Turns out building a marriage on the foundation of impressing other people isn't sustainable. How's it going? Hard. Really hard. But necessary. She looked up at me with clear eyes. I'm learning that I don't actually know who I am without the performance. My therapist says I've been performing my entire life, trying to be what I thought would earn love and approval. That's incredibly self-aware. It's incredibly depressing is what it is. But also kind of liberating. I quit my design job last month. I'm going back to school to study environmental science. I nearly dropped my fork. Vanessa, that's amazing. I didn't even know you were interested in that. Neither did I. Turns out there's a lot about myself I never bothered to discover because I was too busy being the person I thought I should be. She smiled, and it looked genuine. Preston is being really supportive about it, which is good. We're trying to figure out who we are as individuals before we can figure out who we are together. Our mother had also been making efforts, though progress was slower and more complicated. She had started therapy too, working through patterns that stretched back to her own childhood. The Sunday dinners at my parents' house had resumed, but they felt different now. My father asked questions about my writing, actually listened to the answers. My mother had read my novel, all the way through, and we had spent an entire afternoon discussing it. It's quite good, Claire, she had said, and the compliment, coming from her, had meant more than I wanted to admit. The protagonist reminds me of you. Strong, determined, underestimated by everyone around her until she proves them all wrong. That wasn't intentional, but I can see the parallels. I'm sorry I underestimated you for so long. These apologies came frequently now, sometimes too frequently, as if my mother was trying to make up for decades of neglect through repeated expressions of remorse. I had told her gently that I needed action more than words, and to her credit, she was trying. She had attended my book signing last month, had bought copies for all her friends, had even posted about it on social media with genuine pride. My father's transformation had been quieter but no less significant. He had started having breakfast with Daniel once a month, the two of them meeting at a diner near Daniel's office to discuss business, sports, life. Your husband is remarkable, my father had told me after their third breakfast. I'm ashamed it took me this long to see it. Daniel's business continued to flourish. He had just signed a contract for a sustainable housing development that would be the largest project of his career. We had moved into a new house, a craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, already thinking about the family we wanted to build together. My second novel was releasing next month, and early reviews were even stronger than the first. My publisher was talking about a book tour, speaking engagements, possibly adapting the series for television. The 7th grade English class I still taught had become a testing ground for young adult literature, my students serving as my most honest critics. You know what's funny? Vanessa said, pulling me back to the present conversation. All those years I spent trying to prove I was better than you, and it turns out we're just different people with different strengths. There was never actually a competition except the one I created in my head. That's what I tried to tell you. I know. I wasn't ready to hear it then. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. Thank you for not giving up on me entirely. A lot of people would have, after everything I did. You're still my sister. And you're doing the work to become a better person. That matters. As I drove home after lunch, I thought about how much had changed since that June day when the helicopter landed at my wedding. The grand gesture had been satisfying, certainly, but the real transformation had been quieter and more profound. My family had been forced to see me clearly, to confront their own biases and failures, and to decide whether they wanted to be part of my life on new terms. Some relationships had deepened through that process. Others had been revealed as too damaged to salvage. My Uncle Richard, my mother's brother, had sent a congratulatory card after seeing wedding photos but had made no effort beyond that. Some of Vanessa's friends had stopped inviting me to events, uncomfortable with the shift in family dynamics. But the people who mattered, the people who truly cared, had risen to the occasion. Aunt Patricia had become a regular presence in my life, stopping by for tea, calling to chat about books and politics and family gossip. Eleanor Bellwood and I had developed a genuine friendship, meeting for lunch occasionally to discuss literature and history. Daniel's family had embraced me so completely that I sometimes forgot I hadn't been born into their warmth and acceptance. When I arrived home, Daniel was in the backyard, working on building raised garden beds. He looked up as I came through the gate, his face breaking into that smile that still made my heart skip. "How was lunch with Vanessa?" "Good, actually. She's making real progress." "And how are you feeling about everything?" I sat on the porch steps, watching him work. Grateful. Relieved. Sometimes still a little sad about the years we lost to dysfunction and misunderstanding. But mostly just grateful for where we are now. He set down his tools and came to sit beside me. "Any regrets about the wedding? About how public we made everything?" "None. It needed to happen. The secrets and assumptions were poisoning everything. Bringing the truth into the light was painful, but it was necessary. Even if we had done it differently, with a smaller wedding or a private conversation with your family, the outcome would have been the same. The truth needed to come out." "The helicopter was excessive though," I said with a laugh. "The helicopter was perfect. It was bold and unapologetic, just like you're learning to be." That night, lying in bed with Daniel sleeping peacefully beside me, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The overlooked daughter who had learned to overlook herself, who had made herself small to accommodate others' need to feel big. The woman who had discovered her own worth and refused to hide it anymore. The wife who had found partnership built on equality and genuine love. Tomorrow I would wake up and teach my students about the power of storytelling, about finding their voices and trusting their perspectives. Tomorrow I would work on my third novel, continuing to build a career that fulfilled me creatively and financially. Tomorrow I would have dinner with my parents, continuing the slow work of rebuilding relationships on healthier foundations. Tomorrow I would live the life I had created, openly and authentically, without apology or pretense. The helicopter had been a symbol, a dramatic moment that forced everyone to see what they had been refusing to acknowledge. But the real victory wasn't in that single